This is what we call as the aspirational pyramid. You have non-tech companies hiring tech, you have services companies, you have consulting companies, you have GCCs, you have product companies, and you have startups.
You somehow don't figure out whether you are driving the train or riding the train. I think that shock comes the moment you enter a startup. I have been laid off, I have laid off.
Some 85-90% of the startups are going to fail. You as an individual have to start taking responsibility for yourself. Thinking about what makes you employable.
There's this constant tension between well-being and productivity. We have these new trends like quiet quitting. How are you dealing with that to really fit your culture around the Gen Z in the workforce, which is the majority now?
They are very, very smart. They know so many things so well. The main purpose may or may not be working. My main purpose in life may be something else. Needing flexibility when I want it. That is the balance that every organization is trying to do.
And you also spoke about the Gen A that is entering.
Yeah.
The Gen Alpha. It's so scary to even fathom what the expectations are there. When startups took off, it was a niche. It's become mainstream right now. A lot of people wanted to be part of the entrepreneurial journey, aspired to take up startup jobs, and now we are in a state where people are actually, wary of startup jobs. We've seen a hiring boom. We've seen a firing frenzy in a sense. But if you actually look at the mid to long-term outlook, it's interesting to note that startups in India are pegged to create about 50 million jobs and contribute about $1 trillion to the Indian economy by FY 2030, and the startup ecosystem has contributed about 10 to 15% to the GDP growth in India. So, I think it's pretty well established that startups are at the core of creating jobs. But on the flip side, if you look at it, there is a lot of angst, a lot of fear around, the insane work pressure, job loss, job stability, fact that a lot of this is tied to equity funding cycles and the demand-supply mismatch. Towards the end of this conversation, we hope that our viewers will get enough insight and perspective to make a meaningful decision on whether to take up a startup job. What does it entail? The mindset required, the dynamics, what are startups looking for? What is the culture like? And to really plan their career path. As well as for founders and HR folk who are building early-stage startup teams, what are some of the best hiring practices to adopt? How do you cater to culture for the Gen Z in the workforce, and of course, the future of the workforce. Thank you to each, four of you for making the time to delve deeper into this. Let me just start with a lighter question that everybody can relate to in terms of an anecdote that you can share around, startup jobs. Manmeet, maybe if I start with you, if you can tell me about some sort of anecdote or experience when it comes to your best hire or your worst hire, or some hiring mistake that you made, any client that you dealt with, a founder's ask, or a young person aspiring to take up a startup job. What sort of experience did you have?
I think the best ones are always when you get a random email in your inbox and you know that by and large this is not going to be going anywhere at all. But once in a while, and it's usually young people, somebody just out of college who will just decide that they are going to write to the CEO and the head of HR around how fit they are for the organization. And it's always, I think, when the person's done their research, when they have thought about what they want in life, very, very inspiring to actually see that level of enthusiasm. I have had like a couple of people actually even in the HR team hired through that process. And invariably, I think that first part of someone coming in, reaching out and then being able to have that conversation, more than anything else, being able to state their point of view on what they think they want to do. They might be entirely wrong, but I think that just the fact that they've thought about it and they have a point of view on things really, I think, translates into ultimately being a professional who's going to be successful because they're willing to think, they're willing to get stuff done, and they've already taken that first step of sort of putting themselves out there and not being afraid of what the consequences of that might be.
Yeah, so I mean, you're saying these cold emails and outreach actually work. Some of them convert.
Sometimes they do. I think it's just that like how much of your personality comes through in that, and whether the company wants that personality or not. So I think it's a risk, but yeah, I have had some good experiences with that one.
So sometimes when you are discussing with hiring managers on what kind of a role do you want to open, I've had multiple very interesting conversations, and maybe I'll pick one of those. This was in one of the earlier organizations, so nobody in my current place should worry. But there was somebody who was planning to hire Android engineers. This is long ago, you know, sometimes you have no idea of what are you writing as the job specs, right, in the JD. And I read this JD where the search is going on for a very long time. They are not able to find anybody. And then when I read that, hey, you need somebody with 8 years of Android experience. It was about 9-10 years of Android started in the world. I said, are you looking for the founders here? So they had no idea of what will be the number of people once you write those specs, once you write those JDs, at least have a TAM in mind. What will be the total addressable market for this? That I found to be very limited initially in a lot of people, and that needs a lot of coaching guidance by the recruiting teams to sort of tell them what is the right person to look for what kind of role. So I remember this one was a very funny instance, and we obviously had to change the specs after that.
You know, I think, and people very unabashedly apply for roles, you know, whether they fit it or not. In LinkedIn, in minutes, you see crossed 100 applicants, and HR has this huge headache of like sifting through a lot of.
And they will ask you as well after that, why did you not shortlist me? So
pretty confident.
And why not?
I think one aspect which is changing very rapidly now is, you know, I think earlier traditional managers more had a belief that you need to have that functional experience to be able to do. I think now there is greater acceptability of fungibility, that you can have different functional backgrounds, but you can just go about do anything. I think increasingly youngsters do believe in that, you know. So you might want to straitjacket and believe saying you are capable of this because you have kind of taken this experience, but a lot more people come up and say, hey, listen, you know, I think I can do it. I have seen more of those bets coming right now, right? So you have the right frame of mind, you know, you have the right attitude, you say I can go and do it. So I think that works as well, equally.
Yeah, good point.
But I think at a senior level, what I see is, you know, the risk appetite, and so many boxes to be ticked. I remember, you know, in a Kormangala office, with a Series A done, sitting with the founder, and some sales head interview was happening. So I was in the room because we were facilitating, and the person says, look, what is your salary expectation? I'm at 26 lakhs, I want 42 lakhs. So the founder got a call, he walked away, and I asked, this much? Till that time we had not that alignment, and nor do we get an alignment as to what is their expectation, right? So the person said, look, you know, it's just Series A, and you know 95% of it failed. So I'm risking. So the premium for risking is that 16 lakhs, right? So by the time the person came back, I showed him maybe it will not work out, right? That conversation was never going to happen, right? So it never went ahead after that because the risk appetite at senior level, there's so many boxes to be ticked.
As you pointed out, when you ask for such a big jump, I recently saw this ad where they were talking about, you know, I've integrated AI into everything that I do, and hence I'm asking for this raise. So, you know, we'll also talk about how AI is going to shift the entire future of workforce going forward. But, you know, Kamal, if you can share your thoughts on the trajectory of, you know, startup jobs in India and the growth curve that we've seen there. How exactly has that evolved? If you really split it into, you know, pre and post pandemic, what are the demand trends that you've seen in the tech and startup space?
You know, we actually focus mostly on the tech jobs, so I'll stick to, you know, the frame that we work in. So if you look at the pre-pandemic phase, total number of people who worked in startups who were so-called software engineers, technology field, are about 2.5 lakh people. That has, during the post-vaccination period, doubled. We know the boom that all of us, you know, experienced at that point of time. So if you look at startups per se, that number doubled. And over a period of time, even, I know we track unicorns. For example, if you look at unicorns over the last year or so, the 115 unicorns we tracked, they added close to 165,000 people. That's a gross hiring. But if you look at net, they hired 65,000 people net. You know, the previous year corresponding to that, the net was 45,000 people. So as much as we have so many rumblings around unicorns, they're constantly adding net people. So that's a plus of, you know, we cannot measure every startup how much they have hired. So that is, from a number point of view, technology people hiring is something that we are seeing strongly. And at any given time, during the peak 3 years ago, startups used to have almost 30,000 open jobs. Today that is a little less, it's about 15,000, so it's almost halved. So that way you can say that the tech jobs have reduced to a great extent to what it used to be in the past. But we looked at the 190 companies which got funded in the last 2 years. They've hired close to 32,000 people, which is very good. But at the same time, we also see they have a 32% attrition, these companies. So obviously, people make choices, and startups are a place where people experiment for the job. Even startups experiment people, so it's a high churn place. But overall, contextually, when you look at the tech jobs, at any given time, you have 500,000 people working technology jobs in startups. So that's a very large ecosystem that startups have built, especially in tech. And the quality of jobs is also in startups, is a kind that, the techies, if I want to use that word, software engineers aspire to be, and I look at talent aspiration per se from the technology workforce, they would like to be there.
So you're talking in terms of the job aspiration pyramid. As a techie or a tech talent, is startups right on top?
Absolutely. And when I look at, we possibly call 8 to 10,000 technology professionals every day, saying that this is a job available. Of course, today's world, it has changed in the form of whether it is remote or hybrid. That's the first question people ask, and everything else. But I think if I want to start from the bottom of the pyramid, from what we look at it is, the technology professionals who start their job, they start with, let's say, a non-tech company. That would be the first place they'll land up with if they don't have a choice. It could be banks, PSUs, the PSU you can say in Indian context is aspirational from a job, but from a technology professional point of view, you could be in a healthcare company, you could be in a hospital, you could land up in a job there. Then would be what I call as IT services companies, where the largest cohort of people work, which is almost like 2.4 million people work in the IT services companies. We have the big three, the international services companies, you have the Indian biggies, then you have the mid-tier Indian services companies. So then what we call as the big four consulting or the big 10 today, they're also large technology staffing companies in a way. Along with consulting, they staff tech people. Then you have GCCs, as we call it. GCCs have close to about 1.9 million people working technology professionals there today. So that would be the next level people aspire to go. If you look at GCCs today, almost 40 GCCs came to India last year. 50% of the hirings they did were from services companies. So you can see that from service company, of course, they have a large cohort of people well trained, but aspirationally these are large brands, Fortune 500 companies, so people want to be there. On top of it would be what we call as the product companies. You have FANG, you have Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Microsoft kind of companies, which are today in India employ close to 1.4 million people. And on top of it is startups. So when we look at the movement of people, you see clearly that from product companies, people moving there. We know that when kids pass out of college, premium college, they say, okay, we want to work for Google, Amazon, Apple. But from there, when they move to startups, and you can see that last year we saw 8,000 people from product companies move to startups. So this is what we call as the aspirational pyramid. You have non-tech companies hiring tech, you have services companies, you have consulting companies, you have GCCs, you have product companies, and you have startups. So if you ask me why, of course, many things. Of course, there's great money, ESOPs, and most important thing that we found, people who are working in startups are aspiring to be there, telling us is that what I do today, I'll see that tomorrow. Like there are people who tell us, look, this feature you saw in the Swiggy app, I did it. So that's a huge kick for people, and of course, besides the the technology, the latest technologies, you get to work kind of stuff. And we also see, in this talent aspiration, there's significant amount of software engineers who migrate overseas. Last year alone, close to 90,000 software engineers migrated out. Of course, 52,000 came back. The previous year it was 114,000, 72,000 came back. But I think if you look at the talent aspiration, I would say overseas is the highest. But I think in the Indian context, startups would be on top.
Wow, that's amazing insight and information, to know that startups actually rank on top of that pyramid. And when you talk about aspirations, Karthik, even from the entry-level jobs and aspiration blue-collar jobs, we've seen that, of course, the unicorns are creating some of the biggest, in terms of value creation and the big jobs there. We've seen about 115 unicorns minted in India. Till date, another 300 apparently in the next decade alone. Of course, the valuation game, the pursuit of profitability has overtaken that. But nonetheless, what kind of value and job creation are you envisaging?
I think first things first, I agree with Kamal. I think one large aspect, that we keep maybe because we are in Bangalore, we keep thinking through when you think startup is tech jobs. But whether you take D2C, fintech, lifestyle, consumer brands, a whole lot of these businesses which have got created have disproportionate number of frontline non-tech jobs, right? And they really provide the scale, the backbone. Of course, tech has now become such a strong horizontal, there is no business that you can't be down. And of course, one major shift pre-pandemic, post-pandemic is from growth focused at any cost to now, I mean, you got to be profitable, you got to have, cash flow being able to show. And I think that's a distinct difference. But I think one thing which has really taken place is the guys who were really conscious pre-pandemic, I think they have come to stabilize and they have now become really big, right? So I think I've seen growth now that is happening from a consolidated, smaller, shorter set of, large enterprises who have now distinctly their business models have proven, and hence they are now looking at delivering, right? So I think those are startups which are now hiring at big scale, right? Across all frontline, whether it has been, again, non-tech, customer service, sales, right? All of those roles we are seeing a significant uptake taking place.
Ashish, Kamal spoke about the aspirational aspect of startup jobs and the benefits really. A lot of the thought is also the notion and reality as well, that startups are more innovative, nimble, agile. Even for a fresher, they sort of allow you to do stuff and operations across the board. You can sort of ascend the ladder much faster. How do you read into this? You think like all of these are benefits that really draw people into taking up a startup job?
Absolutely. I completely agree when you were saying that, hey, the people prefer startup jobs over any other role. One of the things that we have seen why this happens, and we go and hire at campuses, you will realize that this has reached even at the campus levels where we get to come in at day 1, day 0 slots way more often than startups used to 8 years ago, right? Things have fundamentally changed. I remember the time when I first moved to a startup from Adobe. It was Myntra, it was very small, 2013-14. A lot of my friends asked me why. And later, why did we not join, right? Yeah. I think things have turned, especially for the software engineers or people in tech. What has changed is the fact that in startups, you get to make these 0-1 products, right? You get to code it right there, and that leads to learning. You know that your value will increase in the future. You are working on the best technology. I think I already talked about it. So this is clearly happening, and most startups are willing to also innovate on the kind of model and how much autonomy are you willing to provide. So for example, I'll pick just one example of what we do at Meesho here. So we have a complete pod ways of working. So the way this works is, let's say somebody is working on a product related to some supply chain, right? So typically you will have a product manager, a few engineers there, somebody from the supply chain management business function, right? The way we work is we create that pod, give them the OKR and the resources they ask, and then say, go ahead. Whatever you want to do, you don't have to ask now. So it's a completely autonomous pod, free to choose to do what they want. Now imagine the learning of this one engineer who's just joined there, or any techie, because they get to experiment. You don't have to ask for approvals. You can try experiments, fail fast, learn from it, and launch. So I think some of these kind of models, when somebody becomes very big as an organization, becomes very risky to allow, because the risks associated with the failure are also bigger. But I think that's the reason why startups move faster, allow faster learning. So I think that's is the primary reason.
I think one point I think it'll be good to kind of all of us to reflect: is startup a stage, or it's a company with a set behavior? Because I think I do see increasingly even companies which have completed 10-15 years continue to be called startups, and I've seen there's the average age of a Fortune 500 company is 15 years now.
Oh,
right?
Amazon is still considered a startup.
We like to keep Flipkart as a startup, as long as we can.
And listen, there's a plus and minus to it. You are at a stage, but after a point in time, you have to really scale up. You have better get in some standardized process structures, etc., and all that, right? That's the downside of it. But you also notice really large companies somehow manage to keep the entrepreneurial spirit alive, which is basically, I think you're talking about risk ability, risk appetite, and so on and so forth, right? So as an institution, they have somehow managed to figure out saying, how do I make sure saying individuals can take the right bets?
Yeah.
And risk it without the downside of any disproportionate idea. So I don't think so it is just the first 2 years or 3 years, because I think if company becomes 15 years old, you'd still want some of your talent to remain, people who have kind of bought you there, and who have kind of thought through disproportionately differently, right?
Yeah, a great point. You know, you need to keep that entrepreneurial streak alive.
Yeah.
But maybe probably after you IPO, you can consider yourself a non-startup, which is like a big buzz now in India.
Or
these
after
IPOs.
profitability, maybe.
Yeah. I think that's.
We would love to continue to be a startup.
That's very valid. So Manmeet, your thoughts as well, you know, the flip side of it, of course, ESOPs is another very attractive thing when it comes to value creation in startups. But like Karthik also mentioned, this inherent instability, constant pivots, you know, to really navigate the startup domain, that becomes a challenge. So the flip side of startup jobs, how do you read into it?
As a person seeking a job, I think you have to probably do some amount of soul searching on what is it that you're looking for in life, because the whole idea, I think we talked about entrepreneurial spirit, ability to take risks, ability to deal with ambiguity, to pivot quickly, the idea of building something. I think if that's what sort of is exciting for you, then startups are possibly the right place. But you know, right now there is also this, you know, aspirational idea that, oh, this is where you'll make money, this is how your ESOPs are going to translate into a lot of wealth for you. Those motivations ultimately probably don't end up giving you the kind of satisfaction if those are the reasons for you to join, because anyway, I mean, you've also talked about some 85-90% of the startups are going to fail. So the likelihood of your being in those 10% that are going to succeed is relatively low. So you have to go in saying that this is something that you're going to enjoy outside of what it does for you from a financial perspective. And I think the question of sort of working with people. So you also have to think through the people you're going to be working with. Doing some research in that space possibly makes a big difference, because, you know, again and again at PhonePe, actually even at Amazon, the thing that people used to say that keeps them there is the people that they work with. The learning comes from that interaction, that engagement, that opportunity to be with people who are willing to move things forward with you, to you know, help you succeed, to help you figure things out. And if that is not there, then your learning is going to be much slower, because the advantage that you will have in a structured organization, in an organization that has been around for a while, is that they will teach you how to do things. You will not have the freedom as much to experiment, but you'll learn how to do things so that in 3 years' time, 4 years' time, 5 years' time, you can go into a new space and be successful, because you already know what the right way to solve the problem is. You may not necessarily know how to sort of figure out how to solve a problem, but you have a bunch of techniques have been taught to you, a way of thinking has been taught to you, you have mechanisms, frameworks, etc., that will allow you to move forward and succeed. The startup will not give you that. The startup will develop your judgment. And so therefore you have to be careful about choosing a startup that has people in it that you enjoy being with it, has people who maybe challenge you in being able to think more deeply, and has that environment of being able to, you know, learn fast, fail fast, double click on your priors, reconsider how you take decisions. So your goal in going into these places, if it is to actually develop your capabilities, develop your sense of judgment, learn to think deeper, figure out how to make impact and execute effectively, then a startup is a good idea for you. Because the rest of it, in terms of the money and the ESOPs and the benefits, the likelihood that that will come is actually not all that high.
It's a long-term game.
So you have to figure whether everything else works for you.
Smiling to myself, she said, you know, work with great people. You know, Manmeet, interviews are a wrong
you
place.
You work together.
We both worked 20 years
ago.
20 years ago. That's 20 years ago we both worked together. You know, but I'm saying, you know, when you, in the interview, two best behaved people come. You know, so you know, of course, you can say go to social media, look for what this guy is like, you know, kind of stuff. But in the interviews, we are all well behaved, right? So people say you join for the manager or you leave the manager kind of stuff. But I don't know whether you can really determine, you know, that this is the person I want to join. I know there are better ways to validate
No, what
this.
I'm just saying is that for any startup organization, I think there is actually a fairly large amount of information on what kind of an organization it is. In fact, I often say this, both about Amazon and Reliance, where they're fairly honest about the kind of organization they are. You're not fooled into joining an Amazon or Reliance. You know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
You just have to be comfortable that you're not saying, oh, but at least right now I'll make all this money and therefore I'll join. If you can be honest about these things, I think there is enough data out there, especially in today's world, where you can find out whether this is your kind of company or not. So that's, I think.
Manmeet, one is
Interviews
individuals.
probably
One
not,
is
yeah.
individuals wanting to join.
Huh.
But from your perspective, how do you make an assessment saying this individual? Obviously, everybody's selling themselves.
Yeah.
But this individual is the right cultural fit.
Yeah.
You know, because I think routinely I have seen, and this seems to be a very strange aspect, there is risk ability. I'm a 21-year-old, I have nothing to lose. But there is risk appetite. No, I don't want to go into something which is, and these are two distinct concepts, right? So when you look at an individual, what do you look at saying he has the right functional skills, but will he fit into my company? What is the framework you use to assess that?
Yeah, no, I think the more or less the standard one where you define what works for you as an organization. Because for example, we know that if someone is very much the introverted, solve problems in a room kind of a person, they probably will not succeed. And when you know that you're looking for that, it's hard in an interview really for the person to be able to build that much of an extra personality where they are highly introverted, but in the conversation they come out as being this hugely interactive, collaborative person. So I think we have 3 or 4 things that we consider fairly important, and in the interview process we check, and then again the interview process is multiple people. So you also get to sort of validate whether the narrative is flowing. So I find that conversations that are not so much about tell me what kind of a person you are and more about tell me about the kind of work that you've done, do actually give you fairly good clues as to the kind of person. And it's never 100% right.
Of course.
But it at least gives you that space. I think I will again say, I think as long as we as an organization can be honest about what we are looking for, I think the likelihood of us finding the right people is higher. It's only when we try to be this everything to everyone that things get.
One of the things actually which has worked, and companies have put this in place, including us, is the bar raiser process, because it's difficult to teach interviewing to everybody, but to select few people, who are your best interviewers, they would know exactly how to assess those few things that the company is looking for. And they are generally used more often in taking the go no-go call in the end, as far as culture assessment is concerned. That is running fairly well, at least for us, and I know Amazon used to run that process as well earlier. So that I think generally, companies are fairly clear what do you want from the candidates. Who do you get it assessed with is in our control, right? So interviewers could be.
But also, Karthik, we get lost in the motive part of it. No, why are you joining us versus even the people who are coming to the interview. So let's say people look for whether I'm joining for the brand, am I joining for the role, or it's a great industry, I want to be here, startup is all happening types, right? Or sometimes we know nobody joins without a 30% hike, right? Money is everything. In spite of all these attractions of brand, role, industry, at the end of it money comes, and your people sell managers a lot. Look at the leadership team. People say people join people, but at the end of the day, it's a critical factor for some, but the 2 M's, money and manager, go hand in hand. And of course, off late, it's also about the city.
Yeah.
People want to work in certain cities. There is an aspiration.
That's true.
You might have a great job in Hyderabad, but I want to be in Bangalore because we have a better social infrastructure, let's say. So I guess in this, what we call as BRIM, brand, role, industry, double click on M, manager and money, and maybe the city, all this put together is where I think contextually the decision happens to the person who's joining, even the startup person.
Even the sub-locality in Bangalore these days.
Whitefield versus Koramangala.
True. So in terms of how it has evolved, Ashish, what has been Meesho's role in terms of job creations or the skills or any particular skills that you're looking for? Are you looking for an all-rounder? How has it sort of evolved? And what has been, say, Meesho's role over the last 4-5 years?
There are certain types of people who have worked, and we have seen this now with a lot of evidence and data. People who come with a certain expertise in a particular area may not be necessarily what Meesho is looking for. We are looking for people who are very good at problem solving, and this is a very, very clear skill to identify. We call it a problem first mindset, wherein you are able to first identify which is the problem, clearly cut it down to know this is precisely why it is happening, then start thinking about solutioning. And there are ways in which we assess this. So anybody who is very problem first has worked very well for us. We also assess a lot about mission orientation. She was talking about this earlier. What do you get inspired, whichever company you may be in, do you get inspired by what they're doing, right? Sometimes all of us, I completely agree, all of us are there for money as well, many things, right? And there is no harm in saying or feeling bad or qualms about it.
You know,
yeah.
Where are you in your life stage?
Yeah. There are no qualms in saying I work for money. Everybody needs it. But eventually, is there a mission that drives, or do you relate to it at all or not? I think that is something very, very important to us. We want, because we are in this business of changing Bharat, tier 2, tier 3, right? So it's very important that people passionately feel about it. I think these two and a few other set of user first, there are a few other values which are very, very important to us. By and large, we are very comfortable in putting people into an area where they have never worked. And it has worked for us because they bring very original thoughts and very original questions which earlier somebody would not even ask.
First principles.
Yeah, first principles very important for us.
Yeah. What about you, Manmeet?
Yeah, no, I think for us, we're beginning to get to a place where we are tempering this first principles focus on getting alignment on what's important at an organizational level, because we have noticed that otherwise everybody has a point of view on what the first principles are, and it doesn't matter where the expertise is. It's like, oh, I've thought about it like this and that's what it is. But the corollary value that I think actually works rather nicely for us is that idea of when you talk about influencing, it is about the willingness to be influenced. Your being a successful influencer does not mean that everybody is doing exactly what you want to do. It is the fact that you've been able to change your mind based on the different perspectives you've been able to hear. And that's actually built into how we think about not just obviously demographic diversity, but also thought diversity, functional diversity, bringing people in together across multiple functions, ensuring that there is an understanding of how the fundamentals work, but also common frameworks that help them sort of think about how far you can go with this. We are, I guess, at that space where maybe we are not startups anymore. So we need to kind of make sure that people, when they join PhonePe, they become smarter. They find that they are doing more than they could before, versus being in a place where end of the year they look at their lives and say, oh, I've accomplished far less because all I've done is try to convince people about why what I was saying was right. So that ability to provide people with more frames of reference and ways of thinking, so that everybody at an organizational level can move faster forward, and we can be at our size, still be agile, still be flexible, still be able to get a lot done.
I think it's a great point. I think with both Ashish and, by the way, I love to be influenced, you have to be influenced. I think that's very true. I think very few people understand that aspect because everybody's trying to put in their point, right? But I need to the point Ashish, mentioned about problem solving as a set. I've seen everybody who's done their B school would want to aspire at age 24, 25, I'll be CEO by one day, make so much money and so on and so forth. And then you strangely see amongst many things post 40, right? Money happens, maybe abroad vacation happens, wife happens, kid happens, so on and so forth. And I think the one single thing which drops off is drive. So if you see singularly one thing which is disproportionately responsible for successful individuals, I think if there is drive, which is way beyond all of these elements, because you can still aspire for all of these, but inherently if there is no drive, then I think the entire thing falls off dramatically.
Yeah. Kamal, to just wrap up the thoughts around this startup culture versus corporate culture, we're talking about a more innovative, agile, dynamic, get to do a lot of things, versus corporate culture where you have stricter hierarchy, where you have more stability and a planned career path in a sense. So say after 40, are you looking at people who would be like, bas ho gaya, abhi I'll have like a bit of a stable life, predictable life, or how does it really work?
I think it's very individualistic. We always used to tell founders saying, look, also we used to look at socio backgrounds in the past, fire in the belly, like we used to say cabbie's son, daughter, kind of all these things we used to put into the contextualization and romanticize people who come from so-called humble backgrounds. It's no longer the case, so is age. After, or in the corporates that you come from, some of the people who come from large corporates don't fit into, let's say, startups because they want everything defined. And like I said, nothing is defined, go do your way, doesn't work for them because they have always taken a corner on day one, where is my EA, kind of stuff if you're hiring a vice president and above. And whereas you say you go figure out and then we'll give you one, right? So I think age, I won't say it brings in certain level of, defenses, saying that this is how I would perform. But I think after 40, you also have got some expertise. Are you able to push through that in a startup will become important? And I think people are, today realizing that, at least I need to have one stint in startup.
Yeah.
And there's always a plan B. I can always go back to my large enterprise. Anyhow, there's always a boomerang program in every company, and we are all losing people anyhow, right? So contextually, I'm seeing that is how above 40s is working or not working for people when they choose startup as an option.
I think one very large problem which happens is if you worked in, and given I've worked in large corporates, is you somehow don't figure out whether you are driving the train or riding the train. I think that shock comes the moment you enter a startup, right? And you suddenly figure out you've been riding the train all this while. I mean, everybody wants to fly first class, but flying a plane and flying first class is different, right? I think that's a more reality check which happens with many people. And then they suddenly realize saying, I think this is not for me. I think definitely appetite for risk and ambiguity is like, top notch. Also, I think distinctly smaller companies as well. One trait is, and one trait at least I definitely see more startups have is, I think you should have the ability to do a lot more things than just a defined job.
The expansion part, we call it expansion. Can you expand?
Yeah.
So which I think is mostly a mandate in a large company.
Yeah.
You give me a mandate, I'll do it.
Yeah.
Here you expand on your own, right?
Yeah.
So the bandwidth comes naturally along with that, and I see a lot of founders telling us that, get me people who can give me bandwidth, and it is a very dense statement and you can't measure it. What is a bandwidth, right? So I think people who can expand naturally is what we get as a mandate, saying hire somebody who gives me bandwidth, who also expands, because they want the domain expertise that they bring, let's say from a retail. At the same time, they don't want it to be confined, and how can they actually expand with that expertise in a free field, right?
I
So
think
that
one
that's
also
what we get.
when, very important thing which is happening is, a lot of people come from set backgrounds, etc. and all that. Now we are seeing a large part of, let's say, people who are coming from tier 2, tier 3, distinct drive, especially women, girls who are coming from them, derisively earlier called HMT, Hindi medium type, but now you see the revenge of the HMT, right? They disproportionately are forefront. You see them distinctly different from people who are, let's say, children from large metros, etc. and all that. Disproportionate amount of drive. Also, the second thing is, at some point in time, pedigree and credentialing used to matter a lot more. I think, like you're saying, problem solving has now come forward.
Yeah, but that still exists. 41% of unicorn founders are IITians.
It is true, but it is 41%. There are still balance 59. There are still, there are individuals who can today, and it is happening. It's not necessarily that you have the right credentialing and then you are the only one who's going to do it. I think there is a lot more democratization which has taken place in your ability to, if you have a solid idea, ability to execute, I think you can come forward, right?
I think another factor going to that actually is the fact that, that pool itself has expanded. There is so much to do. And if you were to just limit it to the IITs or the IIMs, there's just far more problems to solve than the ones that limited set of people can solve. And I think all of us also know that people who went through IIT and IIM probably had a particular set of skill set, and real life maybe requires slightly different set of skill set. And now there is enough opportunity in the Indian ecosystem for everybody to sort of find their niche and be able to contribute through that as well. And that sort of allows.
I think one disproportionate, to his point, I think one reason disproportionately pedigreed and credentialing helps is network and access to resources. I think a lot of companies, early stage companies might also fail because they might not have the right network to be able to access resource, right? And that can be a disproportionate amount of differentiator.
Yeah, no, point taken. Our startup is becoming more open to hiring from like regular campuses and colleges rather than focusing on pedigree so much, because I think the agency to actually do and deliver an outcome is sort of topping all of this IIT, IIM graduates. How you look?
I feel it is getting better. Can it get better faster? Yes, I still feel there's a long way to go. There's a big preference. I'm sort of aligned with what Kamal was saying. That's what I keep seeing. I think there is a, naturally when you're hiring, there is a little bit of a pressure to close this fast enough. And there is the mindset that, hey, what I'm looking for, these people would have come through some filter already. So chances of finding it faster are if I look at that CV and know where to check. But it is changing. It is changing pretty fast because, like he's saying, it's the revenge on the other side, not from the hiring manager side. They are doing so well that I think that mindset is changing fast.
I think pedigrees or where you come from are for some certain set of roles. You want a chief product guys. So I think there are certain things that IITs do that is still irreplaceable unless you've already worked in a few places and then come. So I think you cannot take away the pedigree angle per se for certain roles, not because of pedigree, but because of what they have learned because of the pedigree, the skills they brought, not just the qualification.
The mental model.
Yeah, so I think that is where pedigree comes into play, and it is not just pedigree. They will so when I get the briefs, people also tell us that I don't care for pedigree as long as the guy has got skills. If you look at overall, that casteism has reasonably changed over the last few years, because there's a larger ecosystem that has gotten built also. When I was looking at the 115 unicorns that you mentioned, their hiring patterns, 50% of their hirings have come from other unicorns. So there's a large ecosystem, like she said, has got built, that you don't have to go outside of that ecosystem anymore, because there's so many startups.
Yeah.
Unless you are a domain company, you are a fintech company, then you want people from banks. You have good guys who are coming from, let's say, retail banking, wealth management. So you get those people into the stream and make a fintech. So I think as the scale improves and product market fit has happened, your Series B, Series C and D, I think you bring people who actually scale the company, and at that stage you're not necessarily looking at pedigree.
I think at some stage in our country, I think like he mentioned, this is a good surrogate to have. Saying if you have done something exceptionally, you made it to 1% and you passed through a really tough college course, etc. and all that, then you got to have something in you.
Yeah.
I think now if you look at the really Western world, many of the startups is really because of college dropouts, right? Yeah. How does that happen? Yeah. I think, and therefore the indexation is on problem solving.
We've spoken overall and macro quite a bit, and I want to talk about the layoffs and the existential crisis also that we've seen, in startups of late. We've seen about 80,000 jobs being lost, I think, as per various media reports in the past 2 years alone. Does this, Karthik, if you can share your thoughts first, how much of a worry is it? Does it sort of pose a big question mark on the future stability, sustainability, and the job creation potential of startups going forward?
I think first things first, which I would want to put on record is that I don't think so anybody enjoys the process of laying off, right? Whether it is founders or businesses, etc. and all that, it's an extremely painful process for everybody, and hence it happens at a point in time for many reasons. But amongst first things, it could be a business cycle. You kind of caught the wrong wind, came down, and at that point in time you have got to lay off, or you put a bet on some ideas, it didn't work out. Now you got to kind of shut shop and do it. I think those are part and parcel of what companies go through. I think there used to be a stage where individuals could be employed forever, but I think that stage is now kind of behind us. I think everybody fairly realizes the risk of working for a startup. There is risk and reward, and hence I think from an individual perspective you need to have appetite for it, knowing it can go up, it can go down, right? If it goes really up, you enjoy disproportionately, it comes down. My view is, I think we are while what has happened over the last few years, especially including FANG companies laying off disproportionate number of people, etc. and all that, is a point in time thing. Post pandemic, too much of hiring took place. Everybody was saying we're going to miss out on the opportunity. Everything is going to get digitized, etc. and all that. Some amount of over hiring happened in that space. I think it's just leveling off. I think again it's a part of business cycle, part of it. My view is the stage that we are in, I think the hiring part of it is going to continue to increase, right? The skills are going to change, including if you look at the recent, some of the news items which are coming about IT services companies. I think their customers are telling them, saying please bring in more new skills with some of the newer technologies, and it has to be more shorter term projects, right? And the rise of the entire gig work also, which is taking place, especially not just entry level, I mean mid level, etc. and all that. My view is jobs are going to continue to increase on that. I think individuals, as far as they are concerned, they need to look at focusing on saying what skill sets and competency they bring to the table, right? I think that's going to be a much bigger important part. I don't think so we should disproportionately focus on the layoffs part of it. Yeah.
Especially in tech.
Especially
in
tech.
I think the layoffs that has got documented that you're mentioning are mostly in tech.
In tech.
But kids are not standing on the street, are they? So there are, of course, I think
you never know till you lose your job. I mean, the mental trauma.
But we are also demonizing our enterprises which have created these jobs, right? So if you don't allow that flexibility, the thousands of jobs, let's say 65,000 net jobs that unicorns have added, it's phenomenal. Considering last 12 months has not been great, right? Yeah. Very few companies have got funded in this phase, but still unicorns have really grown from a net employment addition point of view, right? So I think if you look at tech per se, I think the industry can absorb. If you look at IT services results, which is just coming out one by one, they're almost getting neutral. And when I saw TCS results, they've added more subcon spend last quarter. So which means that they're in one form or the other. It's about whom are you hiring? Are you hiring interns, full-time, contractors, gig, service providers? So there are various ways they consume. In that way, look at IT services, they're almost green shoots there. And I was just looking at the tech jobs over the last 3 months. I think there is a distinct movement of 10,000 open jobs increase in the last 3 months. So I think as much as you talk about thousands have gone away, but nobody's standing on the streets. They got absorbed somewhere.
So are we saying things are stabilizing now, or Manmeet, your point in terms of we've seen this drop pattern, is it something that we need to make our peace with? Or when it comes to startup, a lot of the hiring happens where it is funding fueled, and then again there's a question mark around everything. Is it something that we need to make our peace?
It's I think one of the things that has definitely happened at this point is that there is a level of good sense in how startups are getting started. I think we did go through one phase where everybody thought that they could be a startup founder, so everybody wanted to be an entrepreneur and everybody could get the money to do it. I think that has tempered, and I definitely think that's a good thing, because now as people are thinking about what are potential value creating ideas, where is it that this could possibly translate into a long-term successful business, people are being a lot more sensible about that. And in that process, when they're going out and hiring people, they're trying to hire people for a company that will last. As an employee, what I would say is that you should constantly work towards upgrading your skill, looking to ensure that you're adding value to the organization that you're a part of. But at an ecosystem level, I think we have kind of gone through the worst of it already. Now there is a lot more positivity in my mind in terms of how the jobs will get created, the sustainability of those jobs, and also the way the organizations think about what's the best way to be able to develop people to create that fungibility, so that they can at least ensure that people can stay with them as far as possible, regardless of some of the changes. The business changes will happen, and as long as employees can demonstrate a degree of flexibility, a degree of patience in how they think about their jobs. I think there have been times where I've had conversations outside of PhonePe where people will be very worried about the jobs, and they'll be like, yeah, okay, I don't know, this change is happening, I don't know whether my job will be sustained or not. And the moment you tell them, no, your job is safe, the next question is immediately then, but what about my increment and promos? So it's this dichotomy that people also have in their minds in terms of think about the value that you're adding, and if at one moment you're not sure if there is enough value for you to even keep your jobs, does it make sense for you to think about what the hike or the promotion in all of that needs to be? So I think at an organizational level, at an ecosystem level, I think things are getting better. At an employee level, I think a little bit more ownership and a little bit more responsibility and accountability for the value that you're creating as an individual is maybe something that needs to be.
I think one aspect which has unfortunately ended up happening, and I think mostly during pandemic and later, you hear about these really large companies making billions of dollars of profit, then why have you laid off 10,000 people? At that question. I think somewhere distinctly post-pandemic, the employer-employee social contract has broken, right? So you treat me as a mercenary, I'll also behave like a mercenary.
Now that speaks for it, for her question on, layoffs and, have you got a sense of it? I think it's still a boom market. Ask about the joining ratios of technology people in their company.
No, but the period between, say, getting laid off and then finding another job is still pretty large, the gap.
Not if you're a techie.
9 months.
Not if you're a techie.
Yeah.
I'll give you a live experience. During the time when all the layoffs were happening, companies who were hiring, I don't remember anybody who was ready to take a pay cut. They knew they will get a job.
Yeah.
Even at the worst time of it.
No, but I think Manmeet made a very important point. If you are getting paid 10 lakhs, you better know that you're adding 20 lakhs value. Yeah. I think if that sense is not there, then you're going to be priced out of the market.
Yeah, and I'm not undermining at any point the fact that it is traumatic to lose a job. It's traumatic to lose a job for anybody, and I think it's especially traumatic when you're kind of early in your career and because it's a validation of who you are in a lot of ways. But I think, and this I'll say that we've been talking about for 20 years now. I read this, I think, article at that point in time called The Elephant and the Flea, which really was that you as an individual have to start taking responsibility for yourself. So one, whether in the organization,
you can't blame the job loss on yourself. No,
but the other part of it is that when I say that, you're saying that you're thinking about what makes you employable. What is the value that you're adding to the system, and how will you continue to be able to add that value regardless of whether this particular set of capabilities end up being useful or not, if this particular organization ends up being successful or not. So I think one of the good things that has happened over the last few years is that it's a lot less of a taboo to have lost your job. At one point in time, it was much like, oh, you must be a complete failure if you've lost your job. Now there is an understanding that there will be a lot of things that will be outside your control. So the opportunities available to you continue to remain high, and you have to be able to kind of look at it in terms of, okay, now everything that I learned in this, which goes back to the original point also, that when you're joining a company because of the value addition it's going to do to you, what you're going to learn over there, what opportunities are going to be available to you, then regardless of whether the startup succeeds or fails, or whether you get laid off or not, you've added capability to yourself. And then the next opportunity, you'll be able to do that much more, you'll be able to add that much more value because you've learned how to sort of work with that entire system.
You know, from a startup point of view though, how do you really look at it? Because I think a lot of startups have done their share of layoffs. At Meesho as well, they've been very direct about the fact that there was a period where they overhired. So it's understandable to a certain extent, you know, you need to change with the times, you have to go beyond, you know, beyond just growth at any scale to making a profit, you need to pivot, market demands, challenging competition, all of that, but it does impact the culture, you know. It's sort of like Karthik mentioned, breaks that contract really, and there is insecurity that creeps in. So at a startup, you know, how did you deal with this phase at Meesho, and how do you sort of prevent like a cultural impact when such a incident happens?
Yeah, so just to give a quick sense of how we saw this, you know, for us, there was a specific stage where we were scaling very, very fast. Why? Not because either we were very funded, we were well funded then, even now, right? But at that point, the investor ask or the board ask was, hey, scale fast, right? Because the market opportunity is there are other competitors coming in, you want to, there is a opportunity cost of missing out if you delay then, right? You have to capture that market. This may be happening at another industry right now, say quick commerce, earlier at tech, etc. This goes through phases. Whoever moves fast will get that market. I feel that will continue to happen. What happened to us after that, and like you said, it was a very, very painful period for us, is the fact that, you know, there was a stage when, even though we were well funded, our ask from the investor had changed. They said, hey, now it needs to be bottom line led, you have to be positive and then keep growing. With that in mind, therefore, all the plans had to change. You know, there were a lot of learnings. One, the important part is at that point of time is first to be very sensitive to what people are going through. It's extremely important. Two, it needs to be very honest in communication. There's no point hiding, and that's exactly what we did. We wrote everywhere on LinkedIn as well. People understand when there is this process happening till the time we are very clear and honest about it. And two, from our side, we are not just showing, we are actually genuinely trying to help whatever bit we can. For example, we went out and, you know, I've seen multiple organizations try to approach it in a very inhuman way, where, you know, suddenly one day that communication comes, all the accesses get cut. That's the way this happens. We decided, no, what is the harm in people getting time to say goodbyes, give them a few days, let them still come to office. What will go wrong? You still trust them, right? So we didn't do any of those access business, etc. at all. We set up our entire recruiting team at that point of time to actually find options outside if they were, you know, so the recruiters actually worked with people to get their CVs, forward it at places. We used to track it and report it back to the company in the all hands every time that, hey, X percentage we have been able to find jobs for now. And that keeps us honest that, hey, this is what we are trying to do. We will not be able to do it for 100%, but what is important is make an honest attempt for doing so. Gradually the culture and coming back to, hey, you know, people started coming into this, that, hey, can you forward me some CVs? I have found another company. So it sort of became a movement in the company. So it sort of, actually, when I look back at it, helped in that positive way as well in the organization and helped us come back culturally. So I think those things were the learnings when we look back at it.
Sure. Great to see such genuine efforts, because we've also heard of a lot of these silent layoffs where, they're laying off people but they force you to resign. They don't really give you the right reasons, and then you immediately start looking for replacement hires at say 30% less. And then again, like, how are you dealing with that? Manmeet, at PhonePe, I'm not sure if you did have layoffs yourself, but overall, how are you reading into this?
So we have been lucky in that sense that we've not really had to go through any sort of a layoff in the company. We were, I will just say, lucky that the growth in the organization was at a much slower phase. We, I think, were also kind of careful around the kind of costs at which we were willing to bring people in, the kind of growth as an organization that we wanted to have. So thankfully for us, we've not really had to have a situation where we've had to kind of do any sort of layoffs in the organization. We do have a performance cycle, so as part of the performance cycle, people do get feedback, and there is a fairly detailed performance improvement plan, as well as sort of that opportunity to improve, to get better. If that doesn't work out, fairly systematic way of ensuring that people have the time to sort of figure out how to kind of move on and figure alternate jobs out for themselves. But I think organizationally, I think some of it is also this whole business of the Wild West, and it's the land grab. You have to do everything all at the same time. And I think as we hopefully over time will get better as an ecosystem at managing that, because the CEO, the CHRO, these are not people who want to do layoffs, because they see the cost of this coming to them at an organizational level, at an emotional level. No founder goes around saying, oh, I'm going to hire 10,000 people and then fire 5,000 of them. So if in any way the ecosystem can get a little better about the incentives towards being a little bit more patient, I think, when it takes a lot for the founders to be able to push back where they believe that these are the right values that they want to stand for, especially if there is a lot of push from the ecosystem towards sort of moving in a particular direction. But as an ecosystem, if we can get better at that, I think that will help reduce this particular problem to a large extent, because end of the day, there is a shortage of skills and a shortage of capabilities. We are not really in a place to be able to afford to make do with fewer people.
Yeah, it also boils down to then, like, how do you deal with this job loss? Because I think that's something that a lot of people are also grappling with. So I want to address that as well.
I think I'll start with maybe a chapter in college about, you will be fired one day. I think in a life cycle of maybe 20, 30 years, I don't know how next generation will work. I think we'll all have an opportunity to be fired, though that may not be the right term that we want to hear for ourselves or for our kids. But I think that's a reality. It may not be in your hand. It is contextual to the company you're working, contextual to the city you're working in some cases, depending on what's happening there, the industry that you are in sometimes, right? So all these things sometimes is completely unrelated. Like we crucify startups unnecessarily because they're in front of us, that so many people are laid off. Also because they come more in the open and declare that we've laid off. But if you look at the sheer number of people who always been laid off were MNCs, where something happens, your results are not great in US, you lay off people, and that doesn't come into the press because of various reasons. But we clearly know, being in the recruitment industry, that so many people got laid off in this large company. So I think layoffs has always been integral to our jobs ecosystem. I think thanks to more visibility, social media, and kids today being so open that so many people have got laid off, they'll write it on a social media today. I think it's come out more open in my view. So contextually, I think going back to what you asked earlier, it takes 6 to 9 months to get a job. I think the trauma may last that long, but for people in the 4 to 10 years experience range, if you are in technology, you will get a job in 2 months' time, maximum. And I'll tell you an experience. One startup, which is a VC-funded company, had 150 people to be laid off. They called us, and we went there, and we were trying to do the thing of pehle CV karo, then do this, do that. You won't believe, for that meeting, hardly 25 people turned up. And some of the people we were talking, they're saying, look, I got double the salary in Amazon, I'm going here, I'm going there. And I'm like, we collected some money upfront, but we did nothing about it. So in the sense, that cohort of people in the 4 to 8 years experience, and if you're in technology, you will get a job. You're right about 6 to 9 months to get a job for senior people. It takes a time. If you're a CXO, you're at a certain level, you're above 40 or 20 years experience, and you expect your skills, salary, and CV to match, that will take 6 to 9 months time. I'll be worried if at that stage I get laid off, because when I get calls from senior people, because I really worry because I cannot place them overnight.
No, so talking about senior level jobs as well, the other thing that's happening in a lot of startups, well established ones, corporate governance issues, regulatory issues, then again there's this whole shake-up that happens, and you see senior level exits, people become wary again, they're willing to go back to traditional jobs, and there's a lot of scrutiny on them. So how are you looking at CXO roles?
It is difficult for CXOs, I think, who get laid off, especially. There is scrutiny, but I think, like somebody mentioned, that maturity has also come into play, that you getting laid off is not a function of who you are. It's purely the context and the organization and the industry and what is happening outside of it. Let's say there is a huge funding freeze and they don't want so many senior people, like Ashish mentioned, sometimes there's a mandate from the investor to immediately look at few things. So I think at a senior level CXO, it is a genuine problem that they can get laid off and they might land in nowhere, and financially it would be difficult to also cope with certain situations for certain people, and easily people have to budget 6 to 9 months time to get a job, and that's when also you become defensive, saying depending on what are your scars in mind, that okay, I will not work for a startup anymore, I'll go back to a place, and but I've seen the same set of people after 2 years saying I want to try again, right? So there are different, it depends on what you have gone through, and going back after working in a startup to a large enterprise also people have struggled, the romanticism of itna freedom tha, I did in this space so many things, and going back to confined to a role where you take approval for everything, So I see that it's not that people who've gone back saying that I will be here again because I don't want to go through that scar again.
Actually, now there's a shift which has taken place, okay? I mean, one of the very senior individuals, large FMCG companies speaking to, 17, 80s, you pass out from a B school, there are very few opportunities. There were a set of opportunities, so you join that company and you stay there for a long period of time. The same person was saying, now I tell my HR saying, listen, don't aim for loyalty, aim for commitment. So companies are also thinking through saying, you're going to be spending 2 years, which is becoming reality in one sense. I'm just
2
saying,
years is all.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
anything more than that you're
right. So you're committed, you're going to spend. On the other side, I'll tell you, see, I've gone through both spectrums. I've been laid off, I have laid off, right? Both sides of it. And of course, it's not easy at all. I mean, my being own laid off helped me have great empathy when I was laying off people, knowing what goes through. I think amongst many things, at least for individuals, irrespective of the level you are in, what helps really is network of some sorts. I think I went back to all my old bosses, cried to them saying, this is what happened. I made some stupid decision, joined somewhere, it didn't work out. I think amongst many things, colleagues, friends.
You're alumni.
Yeah,
You're alumni.
I think some sort of an alumni, not necessarily
Yeah.
B school or anything like that, friends you work with. Because essentially, I think you're talking about the tech sector, essentially, if people know that you do deliver value, I mean, you'll find your space somewhere. I think people get to know, right?
What age were you at when you got laid off?
32, married, wife was carrying, it was like traumatic.
Wow.
And like to Manmeet was saying, it became like a character thing, right? Job chala gaya, right? But I think now it's not there.
No?
Now I think now it's cool. With youngsters, I tried something, didn't work
You
out.
won't be castigated.
Yeah, it's not be castigated.
Oh, that's refreshing, to just hear that it's become normal now. But even with onboarding senior folk, has it become easier now? Because it used to take a long time to onboard senior folk as well. Are they more, initially at startups, they expected eye-popping salaries as well, when they join startups as well. They still do? Are they not willing to take a bit of a cut because there's so much scrutiny and so much expectation also from that role?
Depends. There are different types of people. So I know folks who will still expect very large salaries and ESOPs, etc. Also, there are people who would take a bet, with lesser salary, but give me stocks, because I know if I work hard, I succeed and the startup succeeds. They end up smiling the most in the end. But both types of people are there. I think by and large, anybody, what I have seen is anybody who has had more entrepreneurial stints in the past or has done startups or been in smaller startups is more open to be the second latter type, while anybody who has been part of very large setups, etc., is more open to be the part of the first one. Mostly, again, exceptions are always there. But yeah, at senior levels, I think one, the number of roles are lesser, the risk is higher, and obviously people therefore want it to be well covered when they take a bet.
And also incredibly difficult to predict success. Incredibly difficult. I mean, recently we saw, large global coffee company, the individual was Wharton, 19 years McKinsey, large global FMCG company, 18 months gone. And the trauma is on both sides. The businesses which is hiring you, they're not hiring you to fail you. They want to make sure saying you join, be successful, etc. and all that. The individual obviously probably shifted cities, moved families, etc. and all that, also wants to be successful. But I think we've now reached a point, given the ecosystem pressure, if you're not succeeding, it doesn't make sense to persist.
Yeah.
You got to call it a call, saying it's not working out, and after a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah, no, and I think what's also happens is that, especially if a startup's had a relatively stable leadership team for a while and then they are looking to add people, they've become a certain kind of company and they've kind of gotten used to how things operate, and they're not yet large enough to have that sort of systemized and standardized, which means somebody who's coming in is kind of taking the weight of driving that entire process disproportionately. So there is a lot. Everybody else has always been there. You're the new one, you're the new kid, you have to figure out how to make your space.
Yeah.
I think startups are not yet very good at being inclusive enough for new people to sort of give them the space to be able to succeed. So I think that again is something that requires significantly more effort. So you have a slightly more, I think it's mostly just this, that you acknowledge the fact that this person probably doesn't know how you work, they don't know all of your acronyms. So how much more systematic can your onboarding plan be, and how much you can do to give that person the space for failure, space to kind of ultimately.
To then you also to just move it to the other spectrum, the other end of the spectrum in terms of freshers and the Gen Z in the workforce. What is the expectation there? There's this constant tension between well-being and productivity. We have these new trends like quiet quitting, bare minimum Mondays, and of course hybrid workplace. So how are you dealing with that at Meesho to really fit your culture around the Gen Z in the workforce, which is the majority now?
Yeah. We are a very young company, by the way, and therefore have to adapt. By the way, we are also learning, not that we are a master of this, I guess everybody is. So there are a few things that we've learned in the process that are very important for Gen Z. Flexibility will be the top of the thing. If you look at the spectrum of how maybe Gen X, Y used to look at jobs, that hey, this is I will retire from here, I'm here for the longer term, etc. That's not the way Gen Z looks at this, right? The main purpose may or may not be working. My main purpose in life may be something else. Yeah. I am working because I need that money. So not to mean everybody thinks like that, but I think that is what is the shift. I need my space, etc. They are very, very smart, extremely smart. They know so many things so well, even at a very young age, that people with a lot of experience sometimes don't catch. They're very, very sharp in that way. So therefore, the way the organizations have to work is obviously hybrid, flexibility. You won't be able to say, hey, this is the way we are. You have to adjust for us. That organizations now have to start thinking in that direction and try to maybe tailor it for what that individual is. You'll be surprised. There was a person who walked up to us, very young, right? And this can be a classic Gen Z conversation only, where they say, okay, what are we doing? Hey, I am taking a break for 1 year. Break for 1 year, why? So I always had the passion to go do climb Mount Everest. So I will for 6 months go prepare for it, and then I'll go make an attempt. After that, if it happens, doesn't happen, I'll come back, start working. I don't think anybody of the older generation is a 1 year break. I would be worried who will hire me after that, etc., right? Yeah. Zero worries about it, because that's my passion. This is, by the way.
But actually, organizations are doing completely opposite to this for flexibility. I hear more organizations saying office hour. So many companies have told me in recent times, and they employ close to 1 lakh people in India, multinationals, saying December 1st everybody is coming, January 1st everybody is coming. So this opposite of flexibility also is happening. So I'm wondering, how exactly are we reacting as enterprises when actually the workforce is saying, I want flexibility?
Yeah, I think there is that conundrum that you were, Shivani, talking about, right? That, there are organizations who have found by experience that, being in office means more agility, more productivity, faster integration with the team. You get a feeling of who we are as a culture, right? As opposed to staying away. But also needing flexibility when I want it. That is the balance that every organization is trying to do. For example, we are a hybrid, some days in office, some days out, but also very cautious of the fact that, hey, there will be days when today I can't come to office for as small a reason as my maid didn't come. It's a genuine problem in Bangalore.
How do you make your peace with it, and do you have no choice? And there's this entire debate around, I think one of the big tech companies also said that there will be differential salaries for hybrid versus work from home.
No, I think there is an element in all of this of, so we talk often about the fact that Gen Zs don't seem to care about the work. It's a by the way. We talk about their own, aspirations and expectations. But I think there is one more element in all of this, which is the sense of community. I think one of the things that we know so much about the Gen Z and later generations is that they are a lot lonelier than most of us have been in the past. And so their need for a connection, a need for a larger purpose is almost stronger than it was before, because say my father would be very happy saying, hey, I'm doing this because this is the job that I have got and I won't find another one, so I'm going to make sure that I don't lose it. And then, whatever more I can do with it, so much the better. For the Gen Z, I think that by itself is not a sufficient reason to work. So then they would like to be engaged in ways that are a little bit more, little bit deeper. And I think what we try to do, I think that's why in fact, for us, the experience of getting people back to work was actually most interesting that way, because the first set of people who were coming in, they had not even completed their college education, right? So their MBA was entirely remote. Yeah. And the fun thing about that was that the people immediately, prior batches, would sort of talk to them and say, but you haven't lived.
You've not had the campus life.
Yeah. I don't think they would have cared about it either.
Right. Yeah. So there is this thing of saying that, hey, come, let's help you find a little bit more of your life. And I think that's what happened. So when we started getting people back to office post-COVID, the joy of it really was with these youngsters, because they had really missed that sense of connection. They didn't have the kind of friends that a bunch of us had from campus because they hadn't been to campus. Yeah. And I think the more they were able to see that, and the more they were able to engage then with the people around them, and with, say, the purpose that we were trying to get them connected to, the more they discovered about themselves that they actually liked. And I think that's maybe something that we try to tap into more and more. There is, of course, a bunch of other things. There are day-to-day challenges. There are the pets who are sick and fiancés who visit and all sorts of things. But I think at Amazon, we used to sort of say this thing, which is also famously a company known for its work culture, where the reason why you're at work is because it's like a book you can't put down. Because you're obsessed with the problem that you're trying to solve. It's not that anybody is asking you to sort of report into work at X time every morning. It's the fact that you can't stop thinking about the problem that you're trying to solve because it means so much to you. And that, I think, the Gen Zs and later care about maybe a lot more than our generation and prior used to sort of care about. So I think that's probably something that as we think about building long-term sustainable organizations, we can think about.
Wow, that's a lot to balance, I think. And you also spoke when we had a conversation earlier about the Gen A that is entering.
Alpha.
The Gen Alpha. It's so scary to even fathom what the expectations are there.
I think Gen Z and even Gen A, I mean, I don't even want to talk about it, just about entering people. This is people who are 2000, right, just about to enter. I think their reality is different from our reality. And I think we have to somewhere accept that aspect. You see the friction is highest amongst managers who have lived a certain way and earned a certain way, and they're saying, hey, listen, I think you're making it too fast.
But Karthik, now the millennial managers are there, no? They should be able to relate to that better. I can understand.
The people who roll their eyes the most are the millennials.
Managers.
They're like, who are these young people?
Yeah, exactly. How come you earn your badge so quickly?
Okay.
But I think there are fundamental things. I think the Gen A guy is going to go to YouTube and learn any topic they want to learn and make themselves five years earlier than anybody else who's there.
But in the startup context, will that not be, for example, what if you see the whole lot of reaction that's happening to workplace pressure and some of the incidents that we experienced recently is about, I don't want to work so many hours, I don't want to be stretched, and startups are that world, no? So Manmeet, I was wondering, we may not say that you have to work so many hours, but culturally in startups we stretch.
But I think the difference is, at least I've seen with passionate millennials or Gen Zs, is that I think there is intensity. Okay, you give me a project, I'm obsessed about it, I'm going to do it for long hours. Don't expect consistency, 9 to 6, 9 to 6, 9 to 6, 9 to 6. I think I'm terribly bored with that.
And I think organizations are learning how to deal with that flexibility.
And I think that part actually organizations have made their peace with. Yeah. It's more the I want to kind of take a year's break just to pursue Everest climbing and all.
But
that's harder for people to understand.
Those Everest climbers are outliers mostly.
I would think, yes, yeah.
I think the second aspect of it is, generally speaking, and we'll have to accept it, maybe, I'll be revealing my age, that I think distractions are a lot more right now for younger individuals than what it used to be.
Absolutely. Even for us also.
Yeah, exactly. So you do see, 23, 24-year-olds really groggy, and I know it's been Instagram reel whole night or whatever that has been, and I think that's the reality of life for many of them. And also the glitz of social media has been such that, a lot of young individuals do feel as if something else, the magic is happening and life is passing by for me, right? So I'm not participating in everything good which is happening, and that kind of triggers all kinds of behavior, including quitting, trying to figure out.
Yeah, and the grass is greener on the other side. How do you also deal with this constant job hopping? Like, what exactly are they do they want? What are they happy with? And how are you shaping your culture according to what they want?
I think people. The good part is, at least the millennials, youngsters are very clear about what they want, at least out of the job. Hey, this career or that kind of role. They're very, very aware about different type of things. They are very clear about what I want to do. The best ways we have figured out dealing with this is to have that conversation upfront. What is available, what is not possible here, etc., and be open about this, because eventually, quiet quitting. Otherwise, they'll move anyways, right? So what we figured is, be very transparent about what is the ask. Typically, it is about career growth. My peers in other organizations are doing that kind of work, are at this level, while I am only this, etc. So, whatever is possible, organizations should try and do. So, and that's why for me, the mantra for dealing with youngsters is going to be flexibility. Organizations will have to learn how to adapt individually to different people, not one blanket policy for everyone.
Isn't that really tough? I mean, how do you
do
that?
At scale,
it's very tough.
difficult.
It's very tough at scale. But that is the only way to deal with it, because your ask may be X, but it may be Y for somebody else, and the organization should be flexible enough to allow for both.
And these things like tenure and all that expectations we used to have, we have to curtail that now. Like I used to go to induction meetings in my previous company and say, oh, look at this guy, 15 years, done this, done that, been there and all. I go to my own company's induction and say, 2 years you do this, fantastic. So that's the mental map I'm dealing with, because anything more than that, I'm being very esoteric. And I think that is all. There is, people are working for a certain period in a certain context for a certain goal and purpose, like you said. Whether it could be money, gaining some experience, and the next step is more important than the current one equally. So I think that they don't want to actually, let's say, work with a bad manager, bad salary, and I think that is where I think I won't call it quiet quitting. I think they're clear. It is loud quitting, so I'm going.
I think one aspect is, the manufacturing model of tenure, experience, and hence money, etc. and all, obviously that part is shifting. I think one new reality is also in the knowledge economy is it's essentially 5% of the people who are doing disproportionate value. It's not ubiquitous, it's not all throughout. I think it's important to kind of protect that 5%, rather than looking at saying I'm going to put some policy
But across. The best guys go, no, Karthik? So that's...
I know.
Actually, the thing is that if you are clear about what is it that is critical to you as an organization, and where is it that you're getting the value, then you make sure that those don't. And I think multiple things, to the flexibility point, like that much more connection with the manager, that much more engagement with what is it that you want out of your career and how do we build that out. Half the time these people also need somebody to provide some guidance, some guidance, some validation, some confirmation of how they should be thinking about things. And like if you are, whether it is 10%, 5%, 15%, making those investments in those people at definitely a personalized level, I think at least from an organization value creation perspective can definitely help.
Fair. Now talking about new realities as well, the other new reality, the big, not elephant in the room anymore, is AI, of course, replacing jobs, and the pace at which we're seeing it happen. So are you actually also seeing a lot of the hiring budget being replaced by AI, especially in, these call centers, customer care areas? We've seen companies like Dukaan, Ola, all of them replacing their call centers with AI automated stuff.
Yeah, so definitely some amount of automation is taking place. Okay, and it's not just in call centers. I think it's also disproportionately taking place in the tech space. I think stuff around testing, etc., and all that, are some of the first ones to go through.
7-8 lakh people were employed in that space, so it's a huge threat.
Yeah. Then of course the next refrain is, are new jobs getting created, etc., and all that. Obviously, some new element, mostly around, as I see right now, content creation, usually disproportionately helpful with some of the at least Gen AI thing, which is kind of coming through. Future, how the entire thing is disproportionately going to change. I think there are two aspects to it. I think the new literate will be also, it's also the quality of your querying. It's not that some of these tools automatically give you the answers just because you're in front of them. So you need to be educated, literate at a particular level to be able to kind of get a response amongst them. I think people who kind of skilled enough to be able to utilize that will continue to find new roles, or it's called prompt engineering. So in different places, what is that and what way they can deliver.
So to your point about AI also creating more jobs, of course the tech boom created a lot of jobs, but are we seeing the AI boom creating a proportional amount of jobs versus the losses? Because
early days, to be honest with you. In fact, from an India perspective, I think one needs to be slightly more watchful as well, because if you have a workforce, let's say in the US, who's at a particular education level, their ability to readapt, utilize those tools slightly more easier. If you have a workforce which is literacy plus, etc., and all that, they need to be skilled to be able to do a particular set of job. Can AI help right now as we speak? I think the jury is still out on that. I think it's a much more tougher thing to say. So I don't think so, at least in the immediate run, there's going to be a saying AI is going to take away so many jobs and so many are going to come up. I think people, knowledge economy, services, jobs, etc., and all that, tech field, usually, I think there'll be some arbitration.
And there's still a very small percentage of our workforce. Like if you look at India, we work more with hands and legs than a number of people working through computers and things like that. So, and I'm just adding to what Karthik said is clearly we are 1-2 years away from it creating that kind of a disruption that we expect in the knowledge economy.
We're lucky. The denominator is less.
The people who are going to get affected and the number of people who are coming out as graduates, they'll definitely be more AI enabled, to run with it compared to people who will get affected. So it will be same like, typewriters, computers. I think we will be best positioned as a country to deal with it.
Yeah, and I feel it will take some time as well. My bet is on that it won't happen overnight, because, the language part of it is what people are adapting to. Anything related to language, either voice or, chat, etc. The analytics, analysis, etc., which AI can also do, is still compared to human salaries or cost at India is way too costly right now. So I'm not seeing companies who are opting for that at this point, because it's cheaper to hire somebody and get that done. At some point it will reach that stage where that will happen. By and large, these two, and then some are the other areas where it can help you come up with new models of growth, etc., and so on and so forth. Those are areas where really companies are already starting to look at it. So I think that this language, voice, chat, and these areas of growth, exploration, etc., is where mostly people are focused on. This analytics, etc., is still too costly for Indian salary standards right now.
Yeah, so the best thing you can do as a employee looking for a job is to really see how you can learn enough for it to be an augmentation to what you're doing, rather than it being something that takes over what you're doing. And there is space for people to, because a lot of actually the solutions that are available in the market today are not good. So there is no way that you as an organization can, most organizations are not in a position to have the same quality of service in replacing humans with AI. But if you as a human are figuring out how you can be doing this job that much better using AI, you probably have the best chance of success. So that's probably enough.
So to that point, like how much are you doing in terms of learning and development, upskilling, reskilling? And how do startups also deal with the challenge of lack of resources and budget, because not all like you grow, you scale, you have the budget to have like large L&D projects, but otherwise this whole thing of upskilling and
but I
reskilling.
think this, like so many other areas of skilling in the current world, is around giving people the space to experiment. The learning component of it, as you were talking earlier, whether it is the millennials or the Gen Zs or the alphas for that matter, picking up skills is not something that they struggle with. It's the opportunity to leverage that skill in real life. And at an organizational level, a lot of our effort and initiative is to say, go find the problems that you can simplify using AI, and we will enable that you have the space to be able to do that.
Yeah, so actually same here. The way we are dealing with this is, there's a lot of investment by the way in this, especially in terms of, whatever we are partnering with Microsoft in many things where, they have there are multiple tools which are already being in use. Make sure people are aware of how to use it, what are the opportunities, etc. Then there are pods we have created where those pods are actually figuring out where in the business world can AI help us, because I do feel that there will be suddenly a very big disruption. If you think about it, how the cycles have gone, there was when the new technology, mobile came, it may have changed the world in 10 years. Social came, it changed in 5. AI may change it in 2 years for all we know, and all the ways of doing business might change, and all these changes will become faster and faster. So it's better to be prepared, and that's why there is a big investment. We have a pod which is focusing only primarily on this, looking at what are the opportunities for business on that, but also making sure that the rest of the company is also aware. Difficult to build awareness very high for everybody in one go, but at least that investment will have to be made to whatever extent possible.
So are we in a position then, Karthik, to pinpoint, say, in an AI first future, what are the sort of skills that you should be armored with? Because you did make a point about soft skills as well, because say, a lot of the process oriented and tech oriented stuff will be taken away. Then what are the soft skills that we are lacking as a country or the current workforce right now?
No, I think Manmeet made a very important point. I think this generation is lonely more than anything else. I think a lot of social skills, unfortunately, and communication skills have kind of gone away because of that. It would be probably slightly more easier for the older generation to be able to warmly go across and connect. I think when it comes to soft skills, I think, I would say being able to articulate, as basic as that, being able to collaborate and work with others. I think one of the larger problems is, if you've been born in a tech-only world and you think that conflict can be resolved by sending a WhatsApp message or email, I think you essentially not understood the fact that the perception of what the other person is going to read the email is going to determine how the problem is going to get solved. I think that's one of the larger problems of your work from home and work from office, right? My ability to come across to you and tell you saying, listen, this is the reason why I'm not being able to do it, makes it distinctly different. So in my view, I think soft skills, let's say if I take sales as a code, being able to sell, being able to negotiate, being able to, read, what the customer is saying. I think those are skills which will continue to have a premium, no doubt about it. I think purely, AI, as we speak at this point in time, force multiplier, some amount of automation probably will take place, but I think most of them will help boost the individual's work. But I think the fundamental core needs to be there in terms of, as an individual, whether you have the right social skills, being able to connect, being able to sell. I think those will be really important.
Now, coming full circle and then talking about retaining talent as well. In startups, how do you, obviously if you are part of, the founding team, they stay for the long term, but how do you really retain people who are core to you? What is the level of attrition right now at startups? Is it over 20%? And
unicorns, we looked at about 17-18%. 115 unicorns that you mentioned, last 1 year it's 17-18. Individual companies will have variations, and there again the variation will be at the bottom of the pyramid. Entry level again 30% plus, like I said. So that is the attrition, which I think is on par with even MNCs. Large companies, established companies, 3-4% here and there. If you look at IT services companies, large ones are reporting 12.5% at their base, which is still very large in terms of number of people leaving. So I think it is about who is leaving versus how many left. That is how I think you'll have to rationalize from a attrition point of view, if you ask me.
It's a balance, like in any organization, there has to be an understanding of the extent to which the relationship is mutually rewarding. And if at some point it is not mutually rewarding, then I think you as an organization should be resilient enough to be able to take the exit if it needs to sort of come in. But at the same time, you do want to keep the people who have the passion, who have an understanding of the organization you've tried to build, who are committed to the org in the long run, and therefore you're also doing your part about making sure that that commitment stays and there is not unnecessary reasons for people to sort of want to leave because you've broken that social contract in whichever way. Keeping people is really just about being able to continuously be able to demonstrate to them that they're valuable. And one of the ways in which you do it is by continuously making sure that they are challenged and they are getting to do work which excites them, which motivates them, which pushes them to do more, to kind of think of themselves as being capable of doing more. Other things around money and ESOPs and all of that thing I think comes. But fundamentally, I think the starting point for anybody to start saying that, hey, I want to look for another job is that I no longer feel like I am contributing as much as I used to be able to.
There's a kind of framework we talk at Xfina, which is about, let's say, it starts with connection, and we call it certain stages, connection matters a lot, so we stay. Then, at a certain set of employees, it's about directions that I'm getting, am I getting that direction to go where I am within the company and beyond. And we talk about support, many of us at a certain phase in the organization need that support from the organization. And we talk about what we call as growth and rewards. And I think at various stages of us in a startup, whether you're getting the connection, whether it's initially founders, then the leadership team, because you become larger like you guys have become, Ramesh or PhonePe, then how long can the founders have the connection, next leadership bringing that, right? Some of them just want direction and then some of them getting support. And I think growth is a driver. Everybody talks about growth. If you look at any of the surveys they're talking about, I don't see a growth happening for my role or my team kind of stuff. And rewards is everlasting. You need to be very creative. The HR teams have to come up with new things. I think at various stages, all these things, is something that companies have to customize, treat employees like, customers and see which of these parts these employees belong into. And then possibly customize that.
I think what's true for individuals, between individuals is true for companies. The moment one party feels they deserve better, I think it's the downslide starts there.
So a lot of startups obviously don't have like full-blown HR teams till you scale to a certain level again. There, how do you deal with, people say there's no proper onboarding program, poor integration into culture, there's no real follow-up, toxic employees are allowed to stay. That is the next big thing. A lack of succession planning. And even at, well-established startups, there is this blanket incentive. It's a bad year, so there will just be the high performers are never really rewarded. Then of course, underpaid, overstretched, all of these many issues. When you are a startup that is just building, how do you sort of balance all this out? What has been your evolution process? Maybe if you can share from that perspective.
Sure. So obviously now we are at a much different stage and a lot of these things are in place. So talking especially about retention, etc., the one important lens that we do take is the fact that retention or attrition is an output metric. Can't worry about that as a metric. The inputs are really the reasons that everybody is talking about, and that's where we focus on. It could be the career ask of the individual, the kind of role, the kind of money, whatever else, right? The kind of people, manager, etc. are the key drivers. So we look at it from that ENPS lens. So that we hold ourselves accountable on a particular, the employee experience scores and holistically, there are multiple things that could impact you. Initially, what will your priority be? Early stage organization, I've seen people typically start from a small HR operations, payroll, etc., or some hiring, TA, recruiters, right? Because that's important. I have to hire people, I have to run the salaries. The founder has a direct influence on the culture, knows everybody, speaks to everybody, can do the performance review myself, etc. Therefore, forget about HR otherwise as a team, because I know what I'm doing, right? Easier. Gradually, as it scales to a certain level is when it starts to become difficult for the founders, and they need somebody who could help me shape the culture that I that I want? How can we build processes, etc.? Somebody neutral who could tell me what's happening, right? That's the stage where generally HR teams come in, build those structures, etc. in place, build those processes which could help one know precisely what's happening, two, therefore what's the diagnosis, what can we solve, and so on and so forth. Initially HR is small in number, and the founders are playing that role of culture building. Gradually it starts to sort of also become an enabler to the founder to help with that.
Right. So also in terms of measuring culture, like how do you, like what are the tools you use to measure culture, or is there like constant feedback beyond just the appraisal process? That's, an individual performance sort of a thing, but to measure culture at an overall org level, how do you sort of do that?
Yeah, no, I think fairly standard surveys that go out frequently, reactions to how performance processes have sort of landed, group discussions with people. A few years ago, we had done an exercise to just understand what people's sense of the culture of the organization is. If they had to define it, what would they sort of call it? From time to time, if we feel like there is a particular thing that is spiking, the sense of belonging is not what it used to be. So talking to people and figuring out what exactly does it mean to them and how would they like it changed. So we do this fairly systematic way of constantly keeping an eye out on what's important from a cultural perspective to people and also to the organization, and how are we making sure that we are continuing to align with where it is. Attrition data also actually ends up being fairly useful, because those conversations and sometimes post-attrition conversations also give you very good insights on what people are actually experiencing on the ground. And those are actually fairly powerful also, because then you have data which is fairly solid that can translate into easier actionability as well for the org.
How about Glassdoor reviews? You consider that?
I feel like Glassdoor reviews.
Ambition box, which is larger.
Google.
Are they biased with like people who are
you can't have
angry?
so many thousands of people.
I think they can be
you.
biased both ways, no?
Yeah.
Like maybe the more unhappy people putting stuff in there, and also organizations being able to play with that to maybe guide where that particular.
That really be a bad organization for thousands of people to gang up against you and write reviews.
The 3.8 versus the 4.1, like that's not enough of a differentiation.
Qualitative ones, because that's what tells you, no? Because when
I
you
think what I have found is that the data that we collect through more systematic mechanisms give us the ability to react to that data better. The way I think about it is that it's probably far more useful for a candidate looking at the organization than for an organization to figure out what's going on with it.
Okay. Because today in India you have Ambition Box, which is 4 times bigger than Glassdoor in terms of reviews. You have Glassdoor, you have Google. So it's difficult to ignore the qualitative feedback that comes to you, And I was looking at the unicorn data. Out of 115 unicorns, about 60% of them have a rating less than 4.
Wow.
Right, so it tells you something. We can always ignore that part, but I think it's a great input if you ask me.
Actually, if there is a big difference between what data we are getting inside versus what you're getting outside, then your internal channels are not working. It should ideally reflect and shouldn't be a surprise that, hey, I know exactly what they are saying. That is the way we generally look at it. But by the way, the way we measure is, my goals are twofold. Same, the surveys, etc., we call it ENPS. It's a number. We are a highly metric driven company. So ENPS is one, the other is talent density. So we measure
ENPS is
employee experience
NPS,
score.
huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
So net promoter score. So basically it is, you run multiple questions about your manager, your colleagues, are you happy with your career, performance management, blah, blah, blah. Everybody answers, we know where the scores are low, we know therefore what do you need to work on. The other is talent density, which is the quality of talent in the company, right? There are ways we have devised wherein we can measure that, and therefore sort of it's a balance on how you mentioned, hey, there are people, are you differentiating enough? Are good performers getting differentiated strongly on either visibility, salary, many other things, right? So that is what will lead to that. So these are the 2 Uber goals, and then we sort of drill down and then look at our numbers and work on it.
The other thing I want to quickly address, before we wrap up, is across the board, this toxicity culture, being overworked, and toxic managers, a culture overall, it could be subjective in a sense, and it's maybe not only in startups, but it's spoken more about in startups because, that's where a lot of the aspiration is right now. is it very subjective, depends on the person who is dealing with it, that you sort of say that this happened because of things at work, or it's also because of the way you are built mentally? I mean, how do you sort of draw the line there? How do you figure when toxicity has creeped into the organization, and how do you deal with it, especially when you're smaller organizations with growing teams?
And it's a difficult one because, see, I think toxicity is used very loosely as a word, but if I had to look at, let's say there's a workplace stretch, abuse, pressure, all these things put together is when I think it becomes toxic. I think it can happen at 3 levels. One, at a manager level. Organizations can have great policies, they would be great place to work also, but then there are practices. The practices are either by the organization or by the manager.
Yeah.
So, right, like the organization may be saying you may have so many leaves, but the manager says I won't approve, right? That's a practice against a policy, right? Yeah. So, and most of these things happen at, at an entry level, and that's where most of the grunt work also happens. And in that context, I would say there is a level of manager, there's a level of team, and there's a level of organization. And I think toxicity or abuse can happen at all 3 levels. An organization may say, no matter what, you had to work so many hours. They may not say openly, but they will not curb it when it's happening in the organization, right? So that is, in a way, you as an organization, you're driving that culture. Sometimes it happens at the team level. Mostly I've seen that in sales organizations where, I keep saying that, jiski laati uski bhais, so, we keep going after, clients in a way that it is very toxic to the peer group per se. And manager toxicity is well known, right? So you will have one unit in a great company which possibly, is doing in a particular way, and you won't curb it. So in a way it is all organizational. You cannot say that it happened here, but in large scale organizations sometimes very difficult to detect what's happened to unit level. But I think we cannot wash away from the fact that you cannot say that it's happening there, but overall 90% of the organization is all clean.
Anything, especially from a startup context, anything disproportionate which has to be achieved, I mean, disproportionate effort has to be put in at some level. And I'm sure somebody is sacrificing somewhere, usually the founders do it, they have more stake to the entire thing. But when it comes to, let's say, an individual who has voluntarily chosen to kind of work in a company, I agree with what he's saying. I think it's really critical for, what do they say, eternal vigilance is the price of freedom, right? So you have to keep checking as to, whether it is any kind of a toxic culture is kind of building up. Because I think, I have changed my views fully on it. I was usually on the spectrum where I said, you have to take responsibility for yourself. But I think 20, 21-year-olds, more impressionable, coming into the workforce, everybody wants a good job, you want to work for a good brand, right? They might just go along saying maybe they've been asked to work, put in longer hours, etc. and all that. I think manager and subsequent layers of managers have to lead by example to be able to, demonstrate saying, I think there is a limit to many of these things. And I think burnout is real. Burnout used to happen at much later levels of career. Now it's happening absolutely in front lines. People are just falling off the grid.
The organizations who build that toxic culture, they eventually also pay the price for it. If that becomes a part of the culture, eventually candidates know, people know about it, people would not want to join, you will pay higher for it, the salary level across the company will go up. So gradually you are paying for it.
Attrition.
Yeah.
I think one really important part, we miss out. I think it's really important when the job is being described to the candidate that they know that it is demanding work and they be made fully aware saying what is the work about. Because I think if an organization requires to be in a stage where work is demanding.
When you say, you have to work 12 hours, the demanding is a very low, it's a very dense word,
I completely agree.
How can we be specific about the demand?
Yeah, you can't be. But I think as far as possible, I think that it used to be Gallup's first question. I know what is expected of me at work. Yeah. I think in many organizations, many people might not be able to define that only, right?
But I think if you pick it up,
I think if you can give real role clarity before somebody signs up, I think it goes a long way, and at least the individual knowing, saying, I think this is what I'm getting into. I think scare the individual.
Brings us back to the ambiguity in startups, would we then sort of also conclude that if you want to be part of the startup ecosystem, all the pros, cons, you need to be thick-skinned, be prepared, more thick-skinned compared to a corporate stable job, both mentally and, you know what you're signing up for basically.
Yeah, and you will try 10 things, 8 of them will fail. more likely to fail in a startup than in a larger setting, and therefore to that extent be thick-skinned. I don't subscribe to the fact that be thick-skinned of dealing with a toxic culture.
With a toxic
that
culture.
is not. That is not.
That
right.
was my point.
Stretch. Expecting stretch is something that you have to go with.
I think the way to look at it is tremendous learning experience. Yeah, there is no milestone to be reached like a 5th year, 10th year, 12th year. 2 years, 10 projects. I really learned different way of doing things. I think somewhere along the edge, and then I can utilize that in my next career, next whatever it might be. I think any other frame of reference might be slightly more difficult to then justify.
So, closing question, I want to also ask about the stark contrast really in the Indian startup ecosystem. We have like a lot of unicorns that have scaled, and beyond just the valuation, a lot of people also now going for early IPOs. That is at one level. And then you have these research reports that say that 80 to 90% of the startups don't even last beyond the 5th year. So when you are considering a role in a startup, how do you sort of look at this situation where a lot of the startups are also bound to fail, and then where does your career go from there?
Yeah, no, I think to not kind of connect it to your career, meaning in the sense that know why you're getting into it. Don't get into it because you think you'll be a millionaire in 2 years' time. Get into it for the learning that you're going to get, the kind of people that you're going to get to work with, and at the end of it you will have enough to show for it that regardless of what happens to the startup, you will be able to add value at a larger level subsequently. But I think the important thing over here is that if you are the sort of person who likes structure, who likes to be told what to do, who has to figure themselves out, then work in an established organization, figure out more about what makes you excited at work, what kind of work makes you happy, figure those things out, and then maybe get into a startup, because it is going to push you at an individual level in ways in which standard more established organizations will not. And if you're not ready for it, it will be like, I think actually to the point around the toxicity and anxiety, a lot of the anxiety that you get is because you're unable to deal with the ambiguity that you're facing. Yeah. So the more you can do to ready yourself for that environment, the less anxiety you'll have and the less you will feel the toxicity. There'll always be, of course, bad apples and all of that, but you can at least do something to control it by just improving your ability to deal with a particular kind of environment.
Sure. Quick responses now then. Maybe if you could share your worst, the biggest hiring mistake that you made, how and when did you realize it? Anyone on that?
Immediately, and take a call. That's it. Yeah, I think the worst thing anybody can do is to persist. It's a very rookie new manager mistake that I got to hang on, that I'll be able to change.
And as a manager also, your worst hiring mistake, if you look at it in that sense, how do you sort of deal with it? What was it?
For me, it was I fall in love with great interviews. I met somebody and I suddenly realized it was 3.5 hours in Starbucks. Wow. So I said no more interviews, we're hiring this guy. Then we realized that we have people who do great in interviews. The guy whom we interview and the guy who comes to office are completely different, right? They may be saying the same thing about us also as employers, right? But then I realized the guy hardly lasted 6 months and said, my mom.
The new thing now is to just wing it, no?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Let me tell you the reverse of it.
They're all.
Let me the reverse of the candidate saying what you told in the job description and what I'm doing is completely different.
Yeah.
So what are some of the red flags, immediate red flags that you pick up?
I think inconsistency in the conversation, in the interview. I think the fact that by the time you close the 1 hour conversation, you figure out there are 3 or 4 things that don't add up. That to me is the biggest red flag, because it points to like a bunch of stuff under the surface that's going to reveal itself.
There are people who sort of are not, they're trying to be or fit what the company is looking for. Maybe initially early days or early stages, some interviewers may not be able to catch it, but obviously gradually people learn how to catch it, and that is not. I would recommend strongly anybody who is watching this, just understand that there are organizations who are good for you. There are who will not be good for you. Let them know who you are.
You're not fit.
Yeah,
you're not fit for
and
this.
it doesn't mean you are bad at this. It is just that some people will thrive. They are looking for them cultural fits. Some people will not thrive. You better know that now rather than 6 months after joining. Better for you, better for the organization.
Green flags, any that you pick up like immediately, or is there something like that?
For me, it's preparation. And I really get excited when people come and say, you are so-and-so, you're so-and-so, you're so-and-so. You guys do the following things. You are your competition, customers. For me, that's...
I studied all your LinkedIn posts.
I know the kind of preparation you've done. Oh my God, the note you sent is like, it's like my autobiography. But I think clearly preparation excites me, and that's when sometimes that's the trap also. I go and hire those guys who are greatly prepared, but they don't come to office, right? So, but I think for me that's also the red flag.
Horses for courses. For green flag, for example, I mean, sales role, you don't have high energy. I think that's a red flag for me. I mean, that's something that's completely not okay, right? I think because, especially in some roles, if you have energy, you have ability to energize others as well. I mean, there's a big force multiplier, right? So that's one. I think the other really important thing is, the red flag is that inability to detail. I think if you're not able to detail out, then you're all over the place. Then guaranteed you ask somebody a question saying, okay, tell me a time you dealt with what kind of deal was it? And the answer you hear, oh, by the way, last week I did this. Then you know that there is some element of, immediate experience.
Also, these are our own biases, no, Karthik? Like, I get highly biased about people, positive bias, who deal in numbers. who come and say, look, I cracked a $10 million deal. I had 3 years, we did this kind of NPS course. People talk through numbers, so I have a huge bias for that because I'm in sales, so I get biased by that. So I think numbers is a great turn on. And people talk a lot about responsibility. I manage so many people, scale versus achievement. That's another piece of, people actually talking about how big their army is behind them versus, how they led and how much they achieved, What about initial impressions, Do you guys are like, for me, in 5 minutes, if they don't impress me, it's a struggle to stay in that, because you already call them over half an hour, how do I spend?
You can't teach everybody to interview. I think there are some great interviewers, by the way. And that's why when you have 4 or 5 people, they look at the individual from so many different lenses. Right?
That's a good strategy to have. Just hiring is a tough job.
Yeah.
What are the 3 things to never do in an interview or put on your resume, or how would you look at it? Or the most common mistakes.
Fake things, no? Number one is that be your authentic self. So don't invent things. Don't build up stuff that you haven't done. Just stick to what you've actually done and be good at being able to talk about that.
And don't like pages and pages. Nobody reads, right? Come to the point. Write briefly what it is, and obviously they'll know where to look.
Another thing from an interview point of view for me is don't badmouth your employers. Like I was meeting somebody interviewing for a CFO role, and he went on saying he had 2 years stint in every company, dates, all kind of stuff, and about 7-8 changes in a span of about 15 years. And I think every company was almost bad-mouthing. So, and they're great brands. So, I was wondering who
will you judge?
Who will you judge? It's a great brand. How many series of unfortunate incidents can happen with you, all the time? But jahan pe you've taken money and you work for so long, don't belittle them.
And it's a small world, you never know in your network who.
That's a huge put off. Never do that in an interview for me, And resumes, like you said, length is speak. And again, more than length is achievements. I look at that as a thing where people say they write a lot of responsibilities versus achievements.
Yeah, it shows a mindset when somebody writes, say, my role was XYZ, as opposed to saying I did XYZ. It suddenly makes a very big difference.
So some great takeaways there. Last question, from the chief HR and recruitment experts, how should you negotiate a salary?
How much do you pay for this role? So, like when we call our guys call the techies, so they say, what is the budget for this role? That's the first question they ask, right? So of course you cannot ask in the interview. You have to be more tactful because it's considered tacky and whatever. But I think I would, when I negotiated C-level jobs, I basically said, make an offer I can't refuse. But I don't know, at 4 to 10 years you can be that cocky, but I think you can actually basically say, give me an offer you can't refuse. That's all.
No, but how you need to evolve to a certain extent to be that brave and confident to just say that I am worth.
I think in startup you can.
It doesn't happen only when you reach like C-suite. By then
But that, startups you can ask. People appreciate honest conversations in startups. I think they can take it there. I don't think there is so much of ego in startup hiring compared to large enterprises. I feel
people should ask, because it's not a hidden thing that every startup for every role has a range. It's not a fixed point, right? Now they will make sure that they are giving you what they feel is anyways fair. Every company does that because they know that once you join it, you become a liability and a headache for us. So they will do that, but that doesn't mean that, hey, if you say XYZ, I would expect at least this much. There is always a range. So that flexibility is there. Best to ask for it because staying quiet doesn't.
Yeah,
doesn't
but what
help.
I also think is that the subsequent point to that is that don't then get stuck to that number.
Yeah.
Like if you've decided to pull a number out of a hat and it doesn't work for the company, don't end up not getting the job because you couldn't, shift
But
your
how do you
position.
come down from that?
That's what. Like, so you have to know how.
Asked
to.
100% now kya?
If you don't know how to, then maybe don't go there.
You figure out what the reality is eventually, but you're saying you just be direct and ask.
I
think
Are you
for-
finding people
Absolutely.
more confident
Absolute
doing
entry,
that
I
now?
mean entry level or entry plus plus, my view is, research the hell out of it. I think there'll be enough people by which you will get a fair sense of idea. But my only observation is once you kind of agreed, then make your peace with it. पड़ोसी को इतना मिल रहा है, then I think then that becomes a problem.
Yeah.
No, that we cannot eliminate. After we join, we'll know somebody was getting more, right? So that you can't.
So on that note, I think we'll wrap it up. Very holistic conversation, and I hope our viewers, have a lot to take away. Thank you very much for your time. If you found value in this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more such content.